Malcolm X was gone, but his voice, it stayed. In the streets of Harlem, you could still hear him. In classrooms, you could still feel him. In every young mind asking, why? He was there. His death did not end the movement. It ignited new ones. In Oakland, young men formed the Black Panther Party. They studied his speeches, learned his lessons, carried his principles. They wore black berets, carried law books, walked with pride, just like he taught them. In colleges and prisons, Malcolm became required reading. The autobiography of Malcolm X, told in his own words, became a Bible for the bold. It wasn't just a book. It was a blueprint, a manual for awakening, for resistance, for redemption. Black youth saw themselves in him, not as victims, but as visionaries. He had shown them that transformation was possible, that knowledge was power, that dignity was non-negotiable. In Africa, leaders honored him. Statues rose, streets were named. They remembered the man who spoke of Pan-African unity, who believed that black people, no matter the continent, shared a destiny. And in America, his legacy grew stronger with time. Each generation discovered him anew. From the civil rights marches to hip-hop lyrics, his words lived on. By any means necessary, it echoed through stadiums, into protests, into poems, because Malcolm didn't just belong to the 60s, he belonged to anyone who dared to question, to anyone who refused to be silenced, to anyone who stood tall in the face of injustice. And slowly, the world began to see him differently, not as a threat, but as a teacher, not as a radical, but as a realist. He was added to school curriculums, honored on postage stamps, quoted by presidents, but his true honor was in the people, the ones who rose because of him, the ones who found courage because of him, the ones who looked in the mirror and said, if Malcolm could do it, so can I. His daughters carried his light forward. Betty Shabazz, his wife, became a powerful voice in her own right. She raised their 6 daughters with strength and dignity, told them the truth, told them about the man behind the legend. His children grew into women who honored his name, not with anger, but with action. They became doctors, activists, scholars, each one a reflection of the legacy he left behind. In schools across the nation, students wrote essays about him, made speeches in his name, stood up in classrooms and quoted his fire. In prison cells, men turned their lives around after reading his story. They saw that redemption was possible, that intelligence was power, that purpose could heal pain. In neighborhoods across the country, murals went up, his face painted on brick walls, watching over the very people he lived and died for. Malcolm became more than a man. He became a compass, a direction, a reminder that truth has a cost, but also a reward. He once said, when I is replaced by we, even illness becomes wellness. And that's what his legacy became, a collective healing, a shared promise. He taught us that evolution is not betrayal, that changing your mind is not weakness, but strength. He showed what it meant to rise, to fall, to rise again, higher than before, and in a world still learning to listen. Malcolm X still speaks, through voices that refuse to be silenced, through movements that won't be ignored, through generations still rising. He told the truth, and in doing so, he became timeless. Years have passed, decades even. But Malcolm X still speaks, not with a microphone, not from a podium, but through memory, through meaning, through the questions we still ask today. He speaks when injustice makes headlines, when another name is turned into a hashtag, when another body falls in the street. He speaks. He speaks in protests, in poetry, in quiet conversations between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. His voice is in the chants, in the art, in the fire behind tired eyes that refuse to look away. Because the world he challenged, it still exists, maybe not in the same clothes, but in the same structure, the same silence, the same slow violence, and yet, so does the spirit of resistance he inspired. Malcolm taught us to question everything, to think for ourselves, to walk with dignity, even when the road is rough. He taught us that transformation is possible, that a boy called Detroit Red could become a global symbol of truth, that the pen is just as mighty as the mic, that faith and intellect are not enemies, they are brothers. And most of all, he taught us that power doesn't begin in palaces. It begins inside, in knowing who you are and why you're here. His story was not polished, not scripted. It was raw. It was real. He made mistakes. He admitted them. He grew, and he showed us how to grow too. That's why he still matters, not just as a man of history, but as a man of now. In a world begging for honesty, Malcolm X remains one of the clearest voices we ever had. And though they tried to silence him, they only made him louder. So today, when we walk, when we speak, when we rise, we carry Malcolm with us, in the fire, in the questions, in the unshakable belief that justice isn't a gift, it's a right. He told us not to wait, not to beg, not to shrink ourselves to fit into broken systems. He told us to read, to build, to protect one another. He reminded us that unity is not uniformity, but shared purpose. He believed in the power of identity, the power of knowing your roots, your history, your truth. And he challenged us, each of us, to take responsibility. Because real change doesn't start in governments. It starts in kitchens, in classrooms, in quiet moments when you decide to stand up instead of sit back. Malcolm X was not trying to be liked. He was trying to be honest. And honesty is uncomfortable, but necessary. He told America what it didn't want to hear. And in doing so, he earned the respect of generations yet unborn. That's why his story is still taught, still felt, still feared by those who build their power on silence. Because Malcolm didn't just expose injustice, he exposed our complicity, our apathy, our excuses. And he left us no choice but to look in the mirror. What will you do? What will you say? What will you become? These are the questions his legacy leaves us with. And if you listen closely, you can still hear him. In the rhythm of the streets, in the truth of the youth, in the rising voices that echo his fire. He doesn't belong to the past. He belongs to every moment where truth is spoken, where fear is confronted, where dignity demands a seat at the table. He belongs to the student raising their hand, to the worker refusing to be disrespected, to the artist who paints the world as it is and as it should be. And yes, he belongs to you. Because Malcolm X lives in action, not just in speeches, not just in books, but in the brave. So when the world asks you to be quiet, speak louder. When it tells you to wait, move faster. When it tells you to hate, choose truth. And if anyone asks why, tell them Malcolm taught you. And that's a lesson worth living and worth passing on. Malcolm X's voice now lives in yours. They couldn't silence him because you can't silence the truth.